Why would she not like your position?
Yeah, she did not like the position that I was taking.
And I'm pretty sure that's a difference too.
Really interesting modern examples.
This is really the big battleground.
From the perspective of critical scholarship, this is literally within like a generation.
This is just in our conversations.
There's just no question about it.
If I remember correctly, the Aramaic stuff is not written in the first person.
Christians will read this at face value and go, yeah, Daniel lived in Babylon.
How'd you get it?
The book of Daniel is used by several evangelicals today as a way of proving prophecy is true. We even have some people, a little bit different, very strange ways of trying to push this book off like it has no context to 6th century, 2nd century BCE, you name it. It's just purely futuristic, which sounds silly. I mean, the way Jews handled it, none of them ever handled it that way. They all tried to think it had to do with them or their time and stuff. So tell us about Daniel, Dr. Joshua Bowen, and Kip Davis, Dead Sea Scroll scholar, Assyriologist. You've written several books, The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, that goes into a lot of this stuff. And you were actually one of the first people who said, you need to get with John J. Collins, who's the man when it comes to Daniel. And I did. And when I did, you were like, whoa, I didn't know that was going to happen. And then,
how'd you get it?
You have a course you have a couple courses that we're putting out here on MVP courses. And Kip, you have a course too, huge course. You can count that as multiple courses.
And the last lecture is half of it's about Daniel.
Right. Apocalypticism. And you use the Walking Dead and other things that are really interesting modern examples.
Very silly.
Tell us about Daniel from a critical scholarly standpoint and what it's about. When is it talking about? When was it written? Let's get into some of the textual stuff.
So I think when we start, I just have to say that before I started making content on YouTube, I think some of the first stuff I saw from Josh was his responses about the book of Daniel. I'm pretty sure you did at least one or maybe a couple to S.J. Thomason.
Yeah.
who was like going crazy at the time about Daniel. And it's, it just, so that was, I don't know. That's where I think that's one of the first places I got.
She did not like the position that I was taking. It had some interesting arguments.
Yeah. Why would she not like your position?
Well, that is an excellent segue, Derek.
Very good. Yes.
Sort of broadly here, the issue that I think evangelical or fundamentalists face, whether they be scholars or lay people, is this interpretive framework that is driven by the inspiration and inerrancy of the text. And if you hold to that at least in a particular way, when you come to the book of Daniel, the way that it presents itself is it's written by this essentially written in the 6th century by a guy named Daniel, and he's reporting on events that he lived through. Right. And this is so critical for this interpretive approach, because one of the things that you see in Daniel, particularly in the chapters 2 and 7 and 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, is these visions, these dreams, whatever that describe things that are going to happen in the, at times, very distant future for him, centuries later. And this type of predictive prophecy is incredibly important as an evidence for the authenticity of the inspiration, the divine inspiration of that text. And of course, starting way back. So when we think about critics of the book of Daniel, it go back all the way to people like Porphyry. Very early on, it was recognized that, wait a second, the way that the book of Daniel is structured, the things that Daniel gets wrong, the things that Daniel gets right, and the way that those things sort of, play out in the book, led scholars all the way back to Porphyry to say this is prophecy ex eventu, right? It's prophecy after the fact. But this is really the big battleground, because evangelical fundamentalist scholars, need this to be predictive prophecy. Whereas, again, the consensus view, even among most evangelicals that I run into at least, would say, yeah, this is second century, but that doesn't negate its value to us as believers. But that's where the fight is.
And maybe I think it's really important to spend some time talking about the structure of this book too, right? Because on several levels, scholars for a long time have recognized that this is not just Daniel sitting down and recording what's going on from chapter 1 all the way through to the end of chapter 12. But what is actually taking place at a minimum is the combination of at least a couple different types of texts. And like one of the dead giveaways in this is the language.
Yeah.
So Daniel starts in Hebrew, and the entirety of chapter 1, where it introduces Daniel, and he's part of the second exile to Babylon, and he's living, in the court of the king Nebuchadnezzar, and this first chapter establishes him as a prototypical ideal Jew, is one of the overarching themes of this book. So this is all in Hebrew in chapter 1, and then chapter 2 starts, and Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he's very upset by his dream, and he can't remember his dream. So then he invites his magicians and his dream interpreters and his religious entourage to him, not just to interpret the dream, but to tell him what it is. But it says, he tells them, you need to tell me what's going on here. And then it says in the text, and they responded to him in Aramaic. And then at that point in the text, the language switches, and they respond to him in Aramaic. Now, this is something that takes place in other texts in the Hebrew Bible. Like in the book of Isaiah, there's a place where courtiers from Egypt or from Babylon come into Israel, and it said, and it's like, and they said to them in Aramaic, and the quotation is in Aramaic. But then in the book of Daniel, they respond to him in Aramaic, but then the text just keeps going in Aramaic, and then all the way through chapter 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's like this block of Aramaic text. And then in chapter 8, it's Hebrew again.
Yeah.
And 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. These are all Hebrew oracles. So, scholars look at this and go, well, you've got two different literary traditions. And you can divide it. It's not just the language either. They're just completely different types of literature. That whole Aramaic section are these stories of Daniel and his religious piety, of being a prototypical ideal Jew living in the diaspora. This is the overarching theme of all of these court tales about Daniel living in the Babylonian court. When you get to the Hebrew stuff, suddenly it's visions. Visions of the end times, visions of the last days, visions of things that are to come in precise, exacting detail, right? So scholars have looked at this and gone, the response has been, well, we've got this core of material that's Aramaic, this Aramaic literature that has obviously been appended with these Hebrew texts featuring the same character, probably known from they knew this Aramaic literature and these stories of Daniel living in Babylon. So they constructed these visions and set them, in the first person. And I'm pretty sure that's a difference too. If I remember correctly, the Aramaic stuff is not written in the first person.
Christians will read this at face value and go, yeah, Daniel lived in Babylon. But as I've interviewed John Collins before, and I mentioned Daniel was this figure, almost a mythic, legendary figure from the Babylonian mythologies, that there's this, I think it's from Babylonian mythology, but that Daniel was this like mythic figure in their stories or in their literature. Do you think that's where they're picking up, creating the narrative of a Daniel figure from?
So you have a Daniel in Ugaritic texts.
Ugaritic, okay.
And it's been several years since I've looked back at the data. So I don't remember what most scholars say about the connections between them. But you do
this
seem to
figure is also known in the book of Job. I think it's Job and in Ezekiel too.
You sort of have these ideas of as you're pointing out, like these more archetypal, sort of pristine people that are characters able to be drawn upon in that sense. But I mean, I do want to point out that from a Christian perspective, and this is something that I think we all really need to wrestle with, is that these sections are written in Aramaic, and, Jesus probably spoke Aramaic, and, parts of Daniel are about Jesus. So, I mean, like, coincidence? Yeah.
So we have this weird Aramaic Hebrew combination in this book, visions, and then you got stories. Yeah. Some scholars think even some of the stories might. So while we think this is put together in the 2nd century BCE, roughly a decade before any final predictive when things will actually end kind of stuff, some of these stories may have stemmed back an oral tradition. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, like different things like that may have come back from.
Yeah. Daniel, something else we need to say here too is that there's so much more than just what's in our Bible about Daniel. We've got the Septuagint, the Greek translation, which preserves additional material. You've got a story called Susanna, which is a really, really great story, actually, featuring Daniel as a young man. And it's in the Septuagint, it's kind of, Susanna is set right at the very beginning. It's right before the book of Daniel proper, almost as like almost like a prequel, like an introduction to this young man Daniel, who solves this great it's like a great legal caper. He solves this mystery of this. It's like an ancient crime drama where he solves this case of these men are wanting to have sex with this woman, these Jewish men, and they devise a plan to I'm not going to go into it, but it's a great story, and it's kind of set at the beginning, and then there's right in the middle of Daniel, there's a whole big chunk called the prayer of the 3 young men, which is a prayer text that's said in the mouth of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego while they're in the fiery furnace in chapter 4. And then there's stuff at the end. There's Bel and the Dragon, which is a story of it's 2 stories basically. It's a story of the temple of the god Bel, and then there's another story of a dragon that lived outside of Babylon, and Daniel plays an integral role in basically. He's like the Jewish hero in these stories, showing how silly those Babylonians are, kind of thing, right? So there's all this other material featuring this figure, this Daniel figure. One of the exciting things about the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls is that there's all sorts of additional material featuring Daniel. And the really exciting thing about this stuff is almost all of it's written in Aramaic. And so you have, these texts, a couple of these texts are called pseudo Daniel because you can see Daniel's featured by name, but then it's another kind of one of these kind of court stories. It's too fragmentary to know what's going on, but you can recognize that it features Daniel, in the Babylonian court, very similar to the stories that appear in our biblical text. There's another story called I think it's just called The Four Trees. And it features Daniel, and he's, it has something to do with a prophecy of trees relative to kind of in the similar vein as the visions that appear in the Hebrew portion towards the end, but again, written in Aramaic. Maybe the most famous of these texts is something called the Prayer of Nabonidus. And this is a really, really exciting text because it's, again, written in Aramaic. It's written in the first person purportedly by Nabonidus, who was the last king of Babylon. So he rules after Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. He's not a popular king in Babylon. But you've got this very interesting text written in the first person in the mouth of Nabopolassar, where he talks about becoming ill, becoming very sick, and nobody's able to help him. And then this unnamed, anonymous Jewish wise man comes and looks after him and prays for him and heals him, and it's a miracle. And the text of this Prayer of Nabonidus, when you set it alongside the story of Nebuchadnezzar's madness in Daniel chapter 4, you can see a very clear textual parallel, which has convinced scholars that the Prayer of Nabonidus is actually like an old independent form of this story that ended up getting incorporated into the book of Daniel. The anonymous Jew is then given a name. The main figure is changed from Nabonidus to Nebuchadnezzar. And the story is developed slightly from this sickness to Nebuchadnezzar's madness. But it's what the Dead Sea Scrolls have really, really helped us to do is to explore on a fascinating level the very clear development that's taking place within the book of Daniel, and the existence then of this whole wide range of literature. All these, who knows how many types of stories were being circulated, during the Persian or at least the Hellenistic period, featuring this figure named Daniel.
So it's pretty clear from this that Nabonidus was historically actually sick and Nebuchadnezzar went insane. They're both they're both historically accurate.
We do know that Nabonidus was actually he did suffer from an illness.
Yes.
Yeah. This is historically legitimate. He was legitimately. He left. Well, I guess maybe we don't know for sure, but one of the thoughts is that Nabonidus famously abandoned the city of Babylon and went to live out in this other town while he was the king. And one of the thoughts are the reason he left is because he was going to try and treat himself from some sort of debilitating sickness. So
I mean, from the documentation that we have, Paul-Alain Beaulieu wrote, published an entire study on looking at the documentation that we have from the period of Nabonidus, and it's probably a little dry for the average reader, but I talk about it in Volume 1 of the Atheist Handbook. But essentially, what we know is Nabonidus, as Kip has pointed out, was not a terribly popular figure. among the priesthood of Marduk, because what he did early on, and it developed throughout his reign. He started to pull away a little bit from the worship of Marduk and move more toward the worship of Sin, the moon god. And that developed as time went by and became like more substantial, to the point that when he essentially left his post and went to the oasis of Tema and left his son, who shows up in the biblical text as Belshazzar. As he's not quite the role of king.
Yeah.
Right. There are certain things that remain the responsibility and the prerogative of Nabonidus, even though he's actually outside of the land. But one of the things the king was required to do, or at least as far as the tradition was concerned, was each year he would take part in the Akitu festival, which utilized the text, the Enuma Elish, which is, the ascendancy of Marduk. And if the king was not there, they could not celebrate the Akitu festival, and they couldn't do that and that whole ritual. And it's a huge problem. Anyway, but part of the thing that we need to recognize, I think, about the book of Daniel from the aspect of this debate about, is it written in the 6th century? Is it written in the 2nd century? Is the historical analysis of the data points that we see presented in the text. And, as Kip was just pointing out, this confusion of Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus, we know that Nabonidus was Belshazzar's father, not Nebuchadnezzar. And so if you listen to Christian apologists, what they'll say is, well, maybe, Av, or Semitic, the word for father in Semitic doesn't necessarily mean father. It could also mean grandfather, even great grandfather.
In Daniel, is it 5 or 6?
End of 5.
End of 5, yeah. Belshazzar is explicitly identified as the son of Nebuchadnezzar.
And they make this argument, well, maybe it means like grandson, right? Because that's possible in Semitic. But the problem is that
maybe he married a daughter,
right,
of Nebuchadnezzar.
Because that's the next thing, right? It's like, okay, fine, let's say it's grandson. He's not his grandson either, right? And so then it's like, well, maybe. So Neriglissar was, one of the kings in the New Babylonian Empire, and he married one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters. So maybe Nabonidus married one. It's like, okay, well, I mean, how far do you want to go with this? And so is it possible? Sure. But the problem is when you have texts that are explicit, that have these things attributed to Nabonidus elsewhere, it's like, oh, okay, so there's confusion, right? Or intentional or unintentional, changing of the names. And when you see this sort of thing, even with the figure Darius the Mede,
it does the same thing.
Yeah, when Darius, you have Darius the First, and Darius the First has certain things that he did, setting like reorganizations into satrapies. Like these are things that are attributed to this Darius the Mede. That scholars are pretty emphatic. Now, it looks like it's a confusion with Darius the First, who is not. There is no Darius the Mede that we know of. And so, at any rate, the point is that when you come to the text and you look at the historical data that are presented there, you see a pattern, and the pattern is that things that are described that would have happened back during the actual life of Daniel, they're very vague, right? And
wrong.
And he gets some of them wrong, right? It's bizarre, some of the things that he gets wrong. But, if that's all we had, maybe, but the problem is that when you get specifically down into chapters 10 and 11, now you have the prophecy section where it's talking about historical data points that are incredibly specific. Just read through chapter 11 and you'll see this specific king goes to the north, makes this alliance, and then the daughter, and they come with the uncle, and it's like, oh my God, this is crazy. It's not just like this kingdom will reign.
Yeah.
Right. And he gets all of them right up to verse like 35. And at verse 35, it makes what scholars have determined are genuine predictions that are wrong, right? They don't come to pass. And so anyway, the point is this, that when you have early on during the life of the supposed prophet, they're general, get things wrong, but then in the future, very, very specific, gets them all right up to a very certain point. That's what leads scholars to say, we need to revisit this and see maybe he's writing during this latter period.
Yeah, we've got the issues of history. We've got these two different types of literature. Now we've got this expansive collection of literature that's all appears to be Aramaic. There's all this data that accumulates to I think demonstrate without a shadow of a doubt what you're dealing with here when it comes to the book of Daniel. And yet, time and again, the response from Christian apologists especially is that no. This is all stuff that traces all the way back to the 6th century. And it's super important for them because these latter, what scholars will call the ex eventu prophecies, these are prophecies written after the fact that appear in the last chapters of Daniel, are far and away, these would be like smoking gun, best examples of fulfilled prophecies that are contained in the whole Bible. This is why these are so important to fundamentalists and to evangelicals. And now I think it's something that we will often hear then in response from the evangelical side of this argument is, I talked a little bit about some of the different types of Daniel literature in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Very importantly, there were also 6 fragments from 6 copies of the book of Daniel that were discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And evangelicals are very keen to point to this stuff and say, it dates, the earliest copy dates to, they'll like to say to like 120, 130 BCE, which would be late 2nd century. From the perspective of critical scholarship, this is literally within like a generation of when these texts would have been written, right? It's very, very close. A common talking point among Christians are, this is just too close. You can't, they would never have accepted this as scripture if, it was, if it wasn't already very, very ancient. So it has, like, these manuscripts actually show us that here's a community, a Jewish community that believes that Daniel is scripture, and they could have only done so if it's already hundreds of years old. They never would have adopted this, this late literature. So this is I would say problematic. From this perspective, on the one hand, I think it's exciting as a scholar on the other hand, just because of what the actual Daniel manuscripts show us about the book of Daniel at Qumran. For one thing, I mentioned we have 6 copies. I believe it's only 2 of those appear to be like the whole thing, Daniel chapter 1 through chapter 12. And these are not the early texts. These are all from like the 1st century. So the time of Jesus. Now you're dealing with stuff that's like 150, 200 years after the composition of the Hebrew portions of Daniel at the end. So very interestingly, the early manuscripts only preserve certain parts of the book of Daniel. And the earliest one that we have, 4Q Daniel, I think it's 4Q Daniel C or D.
I think it's C. But
yeah. So this is a very interesting manuscript because we have text there that survives from chapters 11 and 12. But when scholars, and it's basically, it's like 2 or 3 single fragments. When scholars are able to reconstruct what's there, we can see how big, like how many lines there would have been in a column in this manuscript. And based on that, we can tell this is a very small manuscript. It's too small to have contained the entire book of Daniel. It looks like it's about the right size to have contained all of chapter 11 and all of chapter 12. So as a scholar, what that tells me is this is a manuscript that predates even the combination of these texts all put together as like a single book of Daniel. So again, we have evidence from the manuscripts themselves which show us this developmental picture. And then I'll just mention one more. Another one of the very early manuscripts is just a single, it's like 2 or 3 tiny little fragments that survive from the first part of Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9 is the famous passage where Daniel is reading Jeremiah's prophecy, and then he sees Jeremiah's prophecy of the 70 years, and he gets upset because he doesn't understand what's going on, because, why are we still in captivity? Why is this still happening to us? And then there's this long penitential prayer that he delivers to God. And at the end of the prayer, Gabriel, the angel, appears to him and gives him the right interpretation, right? So we have a couple of these little fragments which preserve parts of this penitential prayer. But interestingly, what is this? Is this a copy of the book of Daniel? Or is this just a copy of this penitential prayer that was a standalone composition, a proper prayer that people would recite, that then ended up getting folded into the book of Daniel? So, we don't know, but what we can be certain of is that these fragments on their own, as they have survived, they don't readily lend themselves to having been associated with Daniel in any way. He's not mentioned in them. And there's no indication that they would have been part of this larger work.
Yeah, and I think to sort of tie this up, maybe from looking at this and dealing with this apologetic argument, and this is what I like to go to. Apologists will often want to go directly to Daniel 9, 24 to 27. Mm-hmm. They want to say, okay, look, 70 weeks, right? This is from, the destruction or the rebuilding of the temple down to when Jesus rides in on the donkey, right? To the day, who was it that put that? Is it Harold Honer or is it Sir Robert Anderson? I can't remember who. The Coming Prince. Yeah, I can't remember, but it's been calculated down to the very day. Lots and lots and lots of problems with that. But the thing that I do is I tend to just shy away from Daniel 9, 24 to 27, not because I don't think there are good answers for it, but because I think those answers are a little complicated. Mm-hmm. But the easiest thing to do if you're engaging with a Christian apologist who's trying to say that Daniel's predicting Jesus is just go to chapter 8, go to chapter 9, 10 to 12, even chapter 7, and say, who is the final kingdom, right? What's the final kingdom? Because in 8 and 10 through 12, it is explicit. It's Greece.
I think even in one of them, it explicitly says the final kingdom is Greece.
Yep. And when you make linguistic connections and lexical connections between these 4 visions or passages, you see things like this figure that's supposed to come at the end, the one, that abomination of desolation, and that type of language. There's consistency among the four, where you can determine that this final person, this figure that's supposed to come, is Antiochus IV Epiphanes, period. Mm-hmm. There's just no question about it. And so the reason that that's so significant, if Greece is the end before the final kingdom of God comes, real problem for it being Jesus, because we know that the kingdom of God didn't come after Greece. Well, this is why in Second Esdras, I don't remember where, chapter 10, maybe somewhere around there. It talks about the book of Daniel, and it says, essentially paraphrasing, like, Daniel thought that it was Greece, but God didn't reveal everything to him. So now I'm going to reveal to you. Yeah. And guess who it actually is? It's actually Rome, right? Yeah. But there's a reason that had to be written. And it's because clearly Daniel's writing about Greece. So this is it's a showstopper. The apologist, I've never met an apologist that had a reasonable response to that. What they always have to do is go, yeah, but look at Daniel 9, 24 to 27. And even there, like, you can just say to them, look at the language. What's the abomination of desolation? Look in the other chapters. Look in the other visions. What is that, right? Who is this final figure? And it's Antiochus IV. So it has to be.
Yeah, that's why that person that keeps coming up with other names on YouTube right now, who is an apologist, who's, a lone wolf on this whole prophecy game, they see these problems. They see what you're saying, right? So instead of going, okay, yeah, it was Greece. No. If I do that, that's wrong. We know that. No, it's Rome. No. It's not Rome, because if I do that, we got a problem.
Right.
And they do the same thing with me in Revelation. I'm talking about the hill, the city on the 7 hills, and it's ubiquitous at this time. That is Rome. It just doesn't say, we're talking about Rome.
Right.
And also, why are they speaking, symbolically when it comes to the beast? This is Nero. And we know from the Sibylline oracles, Nero was also called the beast. And there's some significance to this connection to what was going on. So all of that, ignore the historical criteria that's near and contemporaneous to tell us what this is. No. What if all scholars are wrong?
Yeah.
Okay. All of you are wrong.
I'm listening.
If all scholars are wrong and it's in our future.
Yeah.
And it's because that's the most probable and likely solution to this. It really fixes this problem that, everybody got it wrong. Because, why did Jews then start saying it wasn't Greece and it was Rome? Because they were wrong. And so this is what happens is you want to recontextualize and whatnot. An interesting point that you brought up about the whole fragment thing, right? Is I thought about what you said before you even got into Daniel we found 9 and 10. We found this little prayer thing, and none of it has Daniel's name in it. And this is the early stuff. We don't know, but the late stuff has the whole collection. And we're talking about a century or two, century and a half later, before you even see the whole book as Book of Daniel. Yeah. But I thought about this 2 things that I thought were relevant. And one of them is, let's just pretend we did have them whole and it was 40 or 50 years later. That assumption they wouldn't take it serious. How do you know what they would have thought?
So I should actually point out that there is, and I've talked about this a couple times before. There is a project ongoing right now at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands called "The Hands That Wrote the Bible." In a nutshell, they're trying to track. They're trying to set better precision on paleography by using machine learning, artificial intelligence, and they've conducted a bunch of new carbon dating for a number of the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of the manuscripts that they have dated is this old copy of Daniel 11 and 12 that has generally been dated to about 120 to 140, 120 BCE. The carbon dating on this one now suggests that it could be as old as like 170, or 180 even. Now, bear in mind,
there's a
they
50
give you a range, right? This is where the middle is.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it looks like it could be really, really old. And the leader of the project, I was just at a workshop in Helsinki, and he was presenting, and he threw this out there. He's starting to suggest, do we maybe have the very first autograph of any biblical text?
That would be amazing.
We don't know, right? But
I would laugh though if they carbon dated it to like 250 BCE, because then I would be like, okay, they're incorporating this literature that predates when we would say this literature was written, and they're just kind of bringing in these stories. You know what I mean? Like to make.
I would say praise Jesus.
I probably would too at that point, but I mean it's wild. Right?
Yeah.
It might be an autograph.
But the other thing I wanted to say about this, and that would be the most amazing thing, is the one book we can really nail down as failed prophecy has its autograph. Like we have an actual, that'd be amazing. The other thing is I thought of Enoch, right? So we have this weird character that goes way, way back into like, pre-flood times. He's this mysterious figure, and all this literature comes spawning up. Yeah. And it's written, Enoch is written as if Enoch's writing this material and Enoch's the guy.
Enoch is also written in Aramaic.
And here's the question I have for the same people who pose this whole 40, 50 years later. Are we supposed to believe that the scribes who wrote that material were just like completely making it up and then like pawning off? Oh, I felt maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. But like the communities didn't accept this. This could be a year ago that scribes wrote this and said, we found Enoch writing. And like, oh, wow. And they believe it. Who's to say that they didn't do that with Daniel or something? Because it's like pretending that people in that Enochian, I'm going to call them Enochian community, because they don't seem very Mosaic. They have their own Torah kind of thing.
Yeah.
They take Enoch serious. Mm-hmm. And did it take 40, 50, 60, 70 years for that literature to finally be taken serious after it was written? I just don't buy that. It's an assumption.
Trying to think of a place where somebody like went back into the closet of the temple and said, "Hey, I found the book of the law."
Oh, the book of the law.
Huh. Yeah,
that sounds familiar.
So Daniel's a fascinating book.
It sure is,
and it's just tying up loose ends here to make this point. This isn't Daniel related. This is just in our conversations, because you're having to drive all the way back home, Kip, and this has been a cherished time we get to spend together. And I hope we can do this in the future. Is that the more we learn, the Dunning-Kruger analogy you bring up with the whole narrow pathway, and we're 50 feet away and then we're 40 feet away and we're like, but not much has changed on our perception. Then we get in the door and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
I'd like to think on some things I might be peeking through the door on. On other things, I know I'm down the hall, and that's cool, because I depend on y'all who I know are way closer peeking in the door. I have to depend on experts who know their stuff. But I'll tell you this, getting to that door, at first it may have looked, and others people might have said, look, he's just anti this. He hates the material. Or he just wants to debunk it. I've actually grown to love it even more now.
Oh yeah,
but from a secular position.
Sure. Yeah,
it's like falling in love with the Bible without the dogma, and you're like, okay, I can actually love this.
Yeah, there's suddenly like 15 more questions, right?
Yeah,
to answer and problems to explore, and it's I think it's exciting. It's neat.
I mean, you can love Transformers and not have to worry about things like, how did Optimus Prime actually engage those rockets on his back? Like, how did that happen?
But some people really do worry about
That's true. It's
Yeah, because he really did activate those rockets on his back, in case you were wondering. Thank you, guys. You have courses. You have YouTube channels. You have books, lots of them. You're eventually, I guarantee you're going to put out more books. You already have one out, but it's not.
I have my monograph is my dissertation that was published, and I have a bunch more that I've edited, but they're all super expensive. And so find those ones for free. They're out there.
And subscribe to their channels. Check out the courses. Get the books. Kip, we're trying to grow your channel, man. We got to keep boosting those numbers. You know what I mean? So Thank you.
Awesome. Thank
Thanks.
you.